something that, you can move. Oh, is somebody?
I am starting to record. So
Okay.
I put a reminder for myself because that's something else I usually forget. So thank you. All right, we are recording.
Okay. So I will start out. A few people here know I sort of look through the list, and there's some people I don't know at all. There's quite a few of those. So obviously I haven't been to the meetings in a long time. And some people that I remember from way back when. So it's a pleasure to see you all. And this is kind of informal. I've got some notes on what to talk about. It's not my topic. So I was thinking of this more as a starting point and then just general question and answers. I'm okay if you're not talking, please be muted. It looks like most everyone is. But if you have a question while I'm talking, feel free to just stop me and ask the question. There is no structure here. Let's see if I can put, oh yes, I can put that up. Now I have a question here. I've just put my notes up in front of me. Can you see the notes, or are you just still seeing me?
We just see you. So
Okay.
You have to, if you share screen, then we can see your notes.
No, we don't need to do that. So some people have already know about this, but I've been growing orchids since 1980. I've had some ups and I've had some downs like most orchid growers, but the last 3 years have really been horrendously bad. And what I'll talk about a little of what happened there, because it does exemplify quite a few of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. In the winter of 2018, I was sick for a couple of months and still able to get up and water, but I wasn't paying much attention, and my reverse osmosis membranes went bad. I have reverse osmosis because the city of Santa Rosa put sodium hydroxide in the water to raise the pH. San Francisco and a lot of the other counties put potassium hydroxide, and that's great. I just spoke to Portland and they found out during the talk, somebody checked it. No, they now have sodium hydroxide. It's very damaging to especially cloud forest plants, higher elevation. It's a basic concept of water quality. So for 2.5 months or so, my plants were getting watered with 55 parts per million of sodium. In that time, I got it fixed, and it takes a long time to recover from the sodium damage. It can take up to a year. So in that time, by the 2000, took about a year, things were starting to come back. I lost about 20% of the collection during that time, just from the damage that it did to the plants. And then things were starting to come back. I started buying plants again, and then things sort of started going downhill again. In the summer of 2019, I bought the 50 pounds of fertilizer that I normally buy every year and a half, 2 years. And by the winter of this year, I realized that I had now lost another like 15% of my plants. Everything was going downhill. Nothing was blooming. Some things were blooming, but they wouldn't open properly, or they were pale in comparison to what they should be. And I finally started asking around, what could this be? I'd been asking before, but finally got some answers. And it turned out it was a bad batch of fertilizer. It was missing something. So one of my rules now is don't ever use just one fertilizer. It's not that the company, I'd used this fertilizer for over 15 years and it was great, but anybody can mix up a bad batch of fertilizer. I personally can do it, and I've mixed up bad batches of things in cooking and in the lab and whatnot. So keep switching out your fertilizers just in case that happens to you. I'm happy to say that I now have lots of root growth. Things that I haven't seen bloom for over 3 years are blooming again. Some things are still blooming pale and some things are still dying, but it's going in the right direction. So
Marni? Oh, so
yes.
someone in the chat was asking if you could describe what the damage looked like. Did it certain specific look? Or?
Oh, there were a lot of specific looks. From the bad fertilizer, the sodium, it just makes things kind of go downhill. You don't get the new growths. Things are just kind of getting weak, and it's not like you get like brown leaf tips. You just start thinking, I'm just not a good grower. I can't grow these things. When they first started putting the sodium in the water in 1996, Maxillarias were doing great. Everything else was dying off. I had a huge die-off of all the New Guinea plants, the pleurothalates, the masdevallias. With the bad fertilizer, the symptoms kept getting worse. What finally made me realize there's something really wrong here is I was getting leaves wrapped around one another and they wouldn't open and you couldn't pull them apart. I had cattleyas do it. Things would get bound up. I had no root growth. I had no flowers. Things were just going downhill. It's an overall decline. And and I've heard other people 30 years ago say, I just thought I'm just a bad grower. And if you start thinking that, your water quality is something to check and your fertilizer would be something to check. The flowers were also very pale from the bad fertilizer. So there was clearly something that was not in that mix. So the plants weren't getting it. Most likely, a lot of it was calcium. And one of the problems with using, what we've been using for 20 years, these low urea fertilizers is some of the nutrients are not taken up as well. So if you have sodium, it will replace what would have been calcium if there's nothing to get the calcium into the plant. So it's also been a slow, roots have started growing. Some plants have bounced back immediately. Others are still just kind of sitting there, I guess, thinking about it. So it's hard to give an overall look. It's just, there's a lot of things going wrong. And you finally just start going, there's something really wrong here. So I'll start out water. Water, one of the first things you look at not just if they're not blooming, but if they're not growing well, if they're not thriving, if they're not producing new growth, water quality. And that could be if you're on a well, if you're city, and if you're not in San Francisco or on the San Francisco water supply, check with your water company online. You can get an analysis of the water for a year, and you can check and see if there's a lot of sodium in there. So as far as whether something is blooming or not, if you have poor water quality, your plant's not going to be healthy. It's not going to, want to bloom. If it's kind of threatened, it will save its energy for new growth in general. If things get really bad, it will decide, I need to reproduce, and it'll put out that last gasp flowering. So too much water or too little water can keep plants from blooming. If you water at the wrong time of year, if it's a monsoon plant and it needs a dry rest, watering in the winter will likely give you keikis instead of flowers, such as with the Dendrobium Quinianum. If you water at the wrong time of year, you'll lose roots. And then if they don't have the roots, they're not going to want to flower because the flowering uses a lot of energy. For fertilizer, it can be bad. Too much fertilizer, too little fertilizer. If it's too little, the plants are not going to get robust and have the energy to do a lot of flowering. If it's too much fertilizer, if the plants are like really happy, they're just growing, they got all this nitrogen, a lot of times they aren't compelled to try to reproduce. They'll just keep growing and growing for a while. So if you've got a really dark phalaenopsis, or Masdevallia or even, Cattleya, they may not bloom. That you need to get the balance between how much they need to grow and how much you need to bloom. If there's too much fertilizer, they frequently don't seem to really want to reproduce. If it's too little, you don't have the energy reserves. If it's poor quality, you have a general lack of flowering, pale flowers, deformed leaves, and all of these symptoms actually can possibly be other things. I put a note up, I put a long note up on Facebook, and I probably got 150 responses to it. And there's a lot of things to go wrong. People saying it looks like, an herbicide. It looks.
Mark, Daisy texted she's on her way.
Oh, okay. I closed my door because I'm
Can we mute that?
so eager to get in there.
Are you going in there?
Yeah, but
Oh, you gotta get Daisy for me.
well, the doorbell rings in that room.
Marilyn, please mute.
Oh, sorry. I'm not muted here. Okay.
So if you're, some plants, if you have too much nitrogen at one time of the year or too little, that will affect the blooming. Ron Parsons was telling a story about a Vanda cerulean that he grew for years and years, and it just kept getting bigger and it never bloomed. And then he switched to switch fertilizers. I don't remember, it was to a lower high nitrogen, but like a bloom fertilizer, and all of a sudden it bloomed. So case of maybe it had plenty of nitrogen, without no reason to flower. Others, for Cymbidiums, they say high nitrogen from January to end of October, and then a low nitrogen or a bloom food, if any fertilizer at all. You can just decrease fertilizer or change to one that's low in nitrogen to help stimulate the formation of the spikes. I had gotten in 2003 a flask with seedlings of Dendrobium dicioides, and it had bloomed once sometime, I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 14 years ago. I still have maybe 5 or 8 or more seedlings still hanging around in the greenhouse. They never bloom. Well, all of them, since I switched fertilizers in February, all of them are blooming now. So that can have a big effect. So, if things are not blooming, try a different fertilizer. Light will make a difference. The length of the daylight or the length of the night will initiate spikes on some things. Seasonal variation, like, monsoon climate, summers are shady, the winters are brighter. You can have intensity that's too little to make it want to bloom. Again, it's going to have relatively more nitrogen than it's using up, or so too much or too little can affect whether it's blooming. If you're not too many people probably have greenhouses with fiberglass on them, but that was a traditional thing. As the fiberglass got old, things stopped blooming. And people would say, no, I can't bloom things. Finally, they put on new fiberglass and bam, everything started blooming again. Darren Norton in Vermont, for Mountain Orchids, had to replace his polycarbonate because the sun, I guess, pretty intense there. And he said he just wasn't getting the bloomings that he had before. If you're growing under fluorescent lights, the tubes get old and need to be replaced because you're not getting the wavelength that you need to be blooming the plants. And the daylight length, I think I already talked about that. Temperature, there's a day-night differential, generally 10 to 15 degree drop at night for most plants. A few things, we'll do without it, but most of them require some kind of a differentiation. and it can be the seasonal differential. Some things you'll find will have, I don't know if anybody uses the Charles Baker's book, Charles and Margaret Baker's books, or the website. They have a chart of day and night, the average minimum, the average maximum. And there's some things that have these huge variations between day and night in the winter and day and night in the summer. And then there are others where it virtually stays exactly the same. So finding out where your plant grows and looking up what the habit is on that will help a lot. Some things want the extremes of a very warm, wet summer and a cooler, drier, brighter winter. In the winter, the trees lose their leaves, the skies are clear, so they're getting brighter light, they're getting cooler, especially night temperatures. And those are all some of the triggers that make orchids bloom. You can also have just the wrong temperature for the plant. If you're trying to grow a cool grower in a warm greenhouse, it's not going to be thriving, no matter how much willpower you put into it. Or if it's too cold a greenhouse and you've got a warm grower, and I've experienced this many times until I got more greenhouses, the plants are not going to thrive. And if they're not thriving, they generally will not bloom well. Humidity and air movement are another two. If you don't have enough air movement and some fresh air coming in, you can get a heat buildup, and that will blast a spike or a bud if it's coming. It can just make the plant shut down. If there's too much humidity, you won't get the transpiration that you need to get a healthy plant and get it producing, enough nutrients. If you have a small greenhouse and you don't have enough shading, or it can get really hot in there, and that will stress the plants out a lot. With the air movement, you can get your plants to flower, and if there's no air movement and the humidity is high, the temperature's down a little low, you'll just get botrytis, so you can't enjoy your flower. Heat and humidity are problems on buds blasting. So that's something to take care of. Insects, thrips, aphids, scale, mealybug can weaken a plant or damage the buds, so you can't enjoy the flowers. And the other thing I thought of one of them was earwigs tend to chew through the middle of spikes, and then they just fall over, usually before the flowers even get to open up. So if you have a plant that's not blooming, you can kind of tick through the list of what can I change. Dan Newman suggested that if you're growing something in the same place and it's not blooming, move it. Generally move it to some place where there's more light. Switch fertilizers. Change the temperature. See if you can get more of a drop in temperature. And there's some things like, a warm growing Phalaenopsis, but there's some of them that want a warm, wet summer, but they want a cooler, drier winter to initiate blooming. So, and that's something I really like the Baker's work, because it sets some of the parameters, or an approximation of the parameters of what a plant might need. And you can check off and see, yeah, well, I did that, that's okay. Maybe something else is out of line. So that's what I have prepared. Are there any questions?
Well, you didn't mention one thing that is my very first go-to when somebody says my plant isn't blooming. My first question is always, when was it last repotted?
Well, that can have an effect on the plant. It's not the first thing I go to, but it's one of them. Yeah, generally a healthy plant is much more apt to bloom, and if it's not repotted frequently, it's not going to be healthy. Right. So, well, but I have things that haven't been repotted for 15 years and still bloom. So it's not the only thing that can be a problem, but it's a good point.
Right.
Marni, you mentioned the,
People are coming to you with Phalaenopsis and some big.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
I'm not sure who's talking. This is Lynn. You
Yes.
mentioned problems with fiberglass and
Polycarbonate.
polycarbonate.
That's
What
not like
exactly happens and why does that impact the blooming?
with the fiberglass, the fibers that are in it age, and that you can start to see them, and they get a little browner, and it starts cutting out the light,
Oh,
the wavelength that the plants use. So Walter Teague at one point was ready to give up orchids because nothing bloomed. And when he put on new, it had been fiberglass. I'm not sure what he put on after that, but all of a sudden everything started blooming again. I went and was speaking somewhere, and don't remember and was at a greenhouse, a large Quonset type greenhouse, and you couldn't even see. I mean, it was so dark, and you look up, and that's just not even the color of the sky up there. And the fellow had started putting in lights on timers to get his things to bloom because nothing was happening. And I was saying, well, why don't you just replace it? Oh, that's too big a job. And yeah, but anyway, it will have a distinct effect. And fluorescent lights will also, as they get older, stop putting out what the plants need, and you periodically have to change them theoretically before they actually burn out. Does that answer it? And polycarbonate, I don't know quite what it is, but it's a certain, I don't know, it was 15-year life. But Darren had said he had to change it because it wasn't working anymore.
Interesting.
nothing-
Thank you. Just
Yeah.
one more thing to think about.
Yeah, there's just one more thing to go wrong.
Marni?
Yeah.
Marni, it's Ron.
Hi.
Hi, so listen, this is just an aside when you're talking about polycarbonate, when you install pieces on, when you install it in the greenhouse, there's that one side you don't put out. You got to put the one side out to the sun. I don't know why, but there's something with there. But
That's where the protective coating is.
Right. So I was asked to ask you if you knew any specifics about Silagene calliana, because I know you bloom them well. So do you have any?
What?
Silagene calliana.
Yes.
Do you have any tips for blooming it?
I grow it fairly bright, almost Cattleya light, and year-round water and fertilizer. It never really dried out. I was growing in a terrestrial mix that had coir in it, some lava rock, pumice, and tree bark. And I finally just repotted it because it hasn't bloomed for a few years and it was just overgrowing the basket, but it did very well. But it didn't bloom when it was very young. It took a couple of years to get a little bit of mass to the plant. So time might be the thing. But moderately bright light, it's hanging up.
Yeah, no.
It's in the intermediate greenhouse and almost the same level as the Cattleyas.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep. Another question? This is your chance.
This is Eric and Eric Sale. Hey.
Good to see you inside of your greenhouse. That's great.
Yeah. And thanks for letting me come up and visit yours because it gave me all the inspiration and it's been a blast having a greenhouse. I ended up just using hydroponic fertilizer. I just go to the hydro store or buy it online because there's so many different brands and it seems it's generally high quality. And I usually mix it up to about like 150 ppms according on the 0.5 scale, which I think would be 3 ECs or whatever.
Well, 3 ECs is, well, there's 2 EC scales. There's the micro and the milli something.
Yeah.
So, but ppm,
So,
I forgot because I use ppm, 150.
Some of the
Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the ppm pens are have a 0.7 scale, so it's really confusing. So
Mhm.
anyways, is 100, is that sound like a good number, 150 ppm?
That,
Or do you have
are you
an
watering all the
opinion on
time? Are you
I
fertile?
also think you use surfactant.
I'm sorry, I missed the
No,
last-
like once every week or two. Once
Uh,
every week or two.
Okay, if you're watering once every week or two in the winter, I'd say that's a little bit low. I'd fertilize a little more often. In the summer, I use about 200 ppm, and that's 200 ppm parts per million of total fertilizer, not nitrogen, because some people calculate and just do the percentage of the ppm of the nitrogen, and I just want to stick the tester in and read it and go from there. So I do about 175 to, well, what I was doing before was about 200 parts per million in the summer, in the growing season, so March through September, October, and I was watering and fertilizing every time. Now and I have been doing this for a while, been doing around 350 parts per million.
Mm.
I water every third or fourth time with just straight RO water. So I still haven't seen any, leaf tip burn, even though things dry out completely. And, you might try as the summer's coming on to increase it a bit, see if you get more growth. Some things need higher amounts, and you look like you've got a varied collection back there. So I would push it a little bit more than that.
And you had surfactant too, don't you? Is that
Yes,
still
I
the
do.
case?
Yes. Whenever I'm fertilizing, it used to be whether I watered or fertilized or not, but now the way my injector pumps are set up, and I'm using 2 injector pumps, I just always add it. The surfactant, if you're, it's like a soap. You can use Dash, is it Dawn dishwashing liquid will also be acts as a surfactant, but there's some very good ones on the market. But it decreases the surface tension of the water so that the water is kind of wetter. The water lets go of what it's on. So if the water's in the crown of your plant, it's going to drain out faster. If the water is, if you're watering moss that's gotten dry, it will wet faster. And it lets it penetrate better, so you don't have to soak the thing to get the moss wet again. If you've got bark or whatever your media is in a pot, if you put regular water, just water without the surfactant in it, it will drain okay. If you use it with the surfactant, it will let go of the bark that it's between and drain out faster. As it drains out faster, it pours, it's wetting the bark, and it's pulling in more air into the bark, which is one of the things. So you don't have those little crevices and empty spaces filled with water. You will get it filled with air. I don't have the botrytis in the winter the same way if I'm using the wetting agent or surfactant.
Cool.
Does that answer what you're?
Oh yeah, a lot of great stuff in there.
Yeah, this was Bob Hamilton told me. I have had people tell me, oh, you're going to start having trouble if you use surfactant, but I have been using it continuously since 1986.
So I guess there is a big variety of surfactants, and I think I use the most, I think it's called non-ionic, like Cocoa Wet. They have these ones that are very mild.
Yeah, Cocoa Wet, I tried it, and you have to use a lot of it to get the effect. I was really unimpressed with it. I would use the Dawn dishwashing liquid instead.
Oh yeah, old school.
Yeah, and it works very well. I use it when I'm sterilizing seed to help things wet out faster. And the Cocoa Wet, it didn't matter how much I put in, it didn't ever seem to get that little bit of foam that I'm looking for.
So
and
just a couple drops or something, just a little bit?
No, well, I was putting it in an injector, so I was putting in like, a cup into the concentrate. And I had to put in a whole lot more than I did of, the other surfactants I was using. So, if
Dawn
it's,
soap.
yeah,
Dawn
I mean,
soap, just
what
a
I'm
little bit.
using is called Suffusion, but you have to buy like a gallon of it, and I get 2.5 gallons, and that's like an 8-year supply. So you might want to go in with some people. Romeo's packaging in Half Moon Bay sells it. There are some other ones, but I would try some other things besides the Cocoa Wet.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now somebody must have a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, there's 2 of you. I was right.
You're right.
So
I'm going to go ahead.
is that Cake Plum?
It is. Hi,
Ah.
Marni. If you stay for show and tell, you'll see my beautiful Proseccia citrina. And my question is that I have at least 2 more that are practically touching that one that never ever bloom. So what's up with that?
Well, they could have come from the other side of the mountain. Maybe they just need to get bigger before they bloom.
Oh, they're old.
So some of them, and I don't bloom, well, I haven't bloomed mine for 3 years and they're, hanging on, but I used to bloom a little more regularly. You might try, how cool or?
It's outside in San Francisco.
It's outside in San Francisco, so you can't really get any cooler than that. Well, it's a tricky one. And I don't know, you could try giving a slightly brighter light or less light, just change something, move it to another spot, maybe where it gets more air movement or less air movement. That's not a satisfying answer, but I think it's the best I've got.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Kay, it's Ron. Marni and
Hi,
I were
Ron.
both talking. Hi, Kay. Marni and I were both talking to Yunor Peralta over, and he lives over in the East Bay, and he grows citrinas. And I've always been under the understanding because it's Mexican, it wants the dry winters, but he waters his through the winter, and we were kind of both really. But I've actually started giving mine a little bit more water during the winter. Even things like Lilium speciosa, which is really always thought to be extremely fussy. As long as it dries off quickly, it can use the water during the winter. You just don't keep them wet. So that might help you get stronger bulbs in the springtime. But you're saying your bulbs are the same size, just some of them are blind growths?
Yeah, the plants don't look that different.
So the bulbs getting, they're not getting any smaller. The bulbs are staying the same size or larger. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, no,
I-
I've got about 14 of them, and I've got some clones that bloom every year and some just kind of take breaks. So I don't know if there actually is a rule as long as everything's looking good. Judy Carney blooms them really well also, almost every year, every one she's got. So, and she's got them on the outside of her greenhouse, and they kind of not a wind tunnel, but they're attached to her intermediate house, but they're on the outside of it, with a cover overhead. But
In Petaluma.
and she blooms them really well.
Yeah, well, she gets more extreme temperatures than I do. Mine is,
Yeah,
hotter and she'll have hotter and colder than I do.
Yeah.
I'll try moving. I tried moving one of them into a little more light, and that didn't do it, but I could.
We saw some in Mexico we saw a gigantic one, the biggest one I've ever seen on a roof on a house in full sun. I was like really taken aback by that, but it was massive. And so they can take quite a bit of light. You just got to be careful about increasing the light suddenly. I think not San Francisco so much, but
Yeah, it's not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
one thing I'll say is that Yunor also waters his Lilium speciosa. He waters a lot, and his stuff is phenomenal. It's like, the pseudobulbs that I'm getting might be the size of a walnut, and he's getting like a lemon or an apple size pseudobulb. It's amazing, and I'm jealous.
It's wrong.
It's a lot hotter and drier where he is too, right?
Not compared to me.
No?
No,
Yeah.
he's got the same temperatures,
Oh.
so we can't blame it on climate.
He also grows everything in rock.
Well, he has mounted plants, and they're not rock. But yes, the Hillhouse potted plants are in rock.
Uh-oh. Sounds like another
Jessica.
Yeah, Asuka.
Yeah, it's in like a granite sort of rock. It's not, pumice or, but wonderful things. He grows wonderful things. So thank you for the help out, Ron.
Great discussion. There's a lot in the chat. I think people should feel free to speak up. There are questions about the water meters and different regions.
Marni, that might be a good idea for Marni to look at that. Do you see the there might be some questions you could answer for sure. And there's a chat thing. It's down at the bottom at the screen. You'll see it.
Yeah, no, I got that. It's just there's like 48 of them.
Yeah, active topic. So yeah, a lot of people were asking about regional differences. So and some folks had started answering them. So
in the water.
Yeah, so like if you live in San Francisco and you have Hetch Hetchy water, traditionally everyone says, well, that's your best situation. But even here it fluctuated, right?
The problem with the Hetch Hetchy water is they might start pumping well water from out by the beach. You can't count on it. So if you want to count on your pure water, especially in the summer when there's less water flow, you really need to be checking the TDS, total dissolved, I don't know if it's salts or solids, in your water to find out. Tom Perliti just had a horrible year where his Cuthbertsonias were just like melting, going awful. And then he found out that it was the water, and he put in RO for that time of the year. Somebody mentioned that there's chloramine in San Francisco.
That's true. They started putting it in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Chloramine has no effect on orchids. It'll kill your fish, but for orchids.
Yeah, we still have chlorine, but I've just heard rumors about how awful chloramine is, but I haven't really heard of it killing plants.
It only kills your fish. Yeah. You get a special charcoal filter. You can actually distill your own water, but you have to use the chloramine charcoal that you get at the aquarium store to do that, to get the chloramine out of the water. If you use the regular charcoal for distilling, it will not take out the chloramine. I was working on that project when I was at the water department. That's why I know.
So you mean for reverse osmosis, because distilling wouldn't be using filters?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So we still have chlorine, so that's something I haven't had to deal with yet.
Marni?
Yes.
So Veronica, so I was a gardener for the water department until January. So I got to talk to a lot of the stationary engineers, and also one of the reservoir I worked at, which is only a mile from the ocean. They came up one year and installed a well there for this exact thing, when they can switch to well water occasionally. And the city is not obligated to tell its customers, nor any of its surrounding counties who buy the water from them, that they're doing what they're doing. So, occasional, but often water testing on your own part is really important, I think, to, to find out if they've all of a sudden switched, because they don't have to tell you. They can just do it anytime. They're not obligated.
And they don't tell you, Ron, because they reopened some of those wells. They had closed them and capped them off years ago.
Yeah.
And they I think they made some new ones, and they reopened some of the old ones. You're right.
Yes, I believe they did. Yeah.
And you better bet this year, with all the water rationing and everything that's going to be going on, it's probably going to happen again.
So
no doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
There was a question here about, can you purchase a total dissolved solids meter on Amazon or similar? And yes, you can. There's a variety, there's a price range. Also, as mentioned, the pH, that's is it acid, is it alkaline? That has, that you can buy a meter to check that. You may be able to get a meter that checks both. And the pH will make a difference, because as you get a higher pH, as you get into alkaline, it doesn't take up the nutrients, most of the nutrients, as well as it does at below a pH. 7 is neutral, so 6.5, even 6 is ideally what you would want the pH to be. And the reason that they add the sodium or potassium hydroxide is to raise the pH. It's about 8.4 in Sonoma County. I believe it's 9.4 in San Francisco. So, you know, if you have a way to adjust it, that would at least be something to check. Generally, if you're adding fertilizer, it will buffer it. It will lower the pH down to, you know, in the 6 to 7 range, which is a reason to fertilize more often, even if it's a lower amount, because that will help adjust the pH and you will get better absorption of the nutrients. Any other questions?
Marni, here's 2 pH meters from Hannah that are, or a pH meter and a TDS meter that are, they're $100. They're super simple.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of people have them if you want one that's robust. Some of the other ones on Amazon and things like that that are a bit cheaper than that, the robustness gets a little bit more questionable. But
yeah, just make sure you get one that turns itself automatically, because otherwise you'll be going through those little expensive batteries really fast.
So Marni, I did actually have a question for you that kind of dovetailed into Eric's question, which was around your use of either like magnesium sulfate or calcium supplements. Do you find, I mean, it obviously depends a little bit on your water source, but if you're using RO water, do you find that that's something that's important for you to do, or are you using a fertilizer that is already supplementing that, or how do you handle that?
For many years, I was using the MSU, and it seemed to be good. Things grew well, things bloomed, a good pollination rates. Then when I got the batch of fertilizer that I think was not mixed properly, or I got the bottom of the batch that hadn't been mixed, whatever it was, then I started, a fellow that I had met years ago was a fertilizer consultant in Europe, started, writing to me, and I'm now using a fertilizer that I'm mixing up with a like a 24-14-14 or a 30-10-10, and then I'm adding calcium nitrate, potassium nitrate, salts with a different injector, so that I'm adding more to it. And that's one of the reasons that I would recommend Epsom salts periodically is a very good thing. It gives you magnesium, which is really necessary to everything, to the photosynthesis. You cannot mix in a concentrate the Epsom salts or the magnesium sulfate with the nitrates. You'll get a precipitate. So that's why I'm using 2. But if you switch around with fertilizers, you probably are getting a better balance. The other thing that I was doing and still do is periodically using something like a good seaweed extract, getting in some natural or a fish emulsion. Oh, now you making me wish I had a glass of wine. All I've got is a bottle of water. So yeah, I would say, I think you're muted. I couldn't hear that.
Sorry, that's the best part about the remote. That's the only great thing about the remote is that everybody can have a glass of wine while they're enjoying the orchid meeting.
Well, I get a little loose. We don't want to do that before a talk. I've forgotten. So anyway, some supplements are good, but I definitely switching around. And if you want to go to one that has a, high calcium, there's a lot on the market. And, but I would say, don't be afraid of fertilizers with urea. We've been told for 20 years, don't use them. But I'm now a firm believer that that's part of the mix.
I have a question about, so I recently got a Dendrobium exdelicatum, and I read, like, right after I had repotted it, that it's one of the orchids that tends to like being root bound more than others. And I guess I was curious if you knew anything about that, and like why certain orchids might like to be in smaller containers. Because I guess to me, I was like, the earth is so big and the ground is so big and the trees are so big that they grow on, like they could just, like, isn't it like huge in nature? Like, what does that mean?
Well, some things like Cymbidium, some of them grow in, have long roots and they grow in rotted trees, and they'll get the roots down there and it's held in place. I think part of it may have to do with how fast they get a wet dry cycle. If you have a lot of potting mix, it's going to stay wet a whole lot longer than if there's just a little bit. If the roots are not in that potting mix or in the bark, they're not pulling the water out. It's going to stay wet a lot longer. So that would be a total guess. But someone else may have an answer to that that's, that's different. And some actually, you can really see that they don't really start to get going until, if you take it out, they've consumed all of the bark. Dendrochilums can be like that. And it's, it's just, maybe they dry fast in nature. Maybe there's a lot of wind and they're immediately dry. I mean, a lot of plants are like that. It doesn't stay, it will change from drizzle or mist or rain, and then all of a sudden it's bright, there's air moving through, so they dry out. Most of them seem to like a wet dry cycle, some shorter than others, some longer than others. Cattleyas want, days between waterings. So that would be my theory.
Marni, may I answer David about that?
Sure.
So David, just real quickly, both of those are not, both parents are, it's a natural hybrid. So both parents are lithophytes. They grow on rocks in Australia. So they actually have they just really don't, their roots can't go into the rocks. So they actually just either go into crevices or just on a rock face with very little lichen even over them. So I think they do really well pot bound. I just repotted a Quiniano that was just busting, only to put it in like the next size. That's one thing you do. You don't put it, any plant, you don't put it into a much bigger pot. You just put it usually into the next size pot. But that one likes the pot boundedness because of its natural habit of living on rocks in the wild. I think that just kind of finds crevices to hold on to, and they're buffeted by winds and stuff. So yeah, I just think that one's, yeah.
And Ron, some of those lithophytes, I found that if you're going to pot them up, like you were saying, it's only slightly bigger. For Quinianums and Speciosums, I just bust the pot and drop the whole thing into a slightly bigger pot. So it's living on concentric layers of pots, just layer upon layer. Because if I go into a bigger pot, I've tried that, and they don't like it at all.
Right. That's true.
And it's easier that way too.
So for folks that are overwhelmed with all the instructions, because everyone has an opinion, I think one thing, I've been growing less than a lot of the people here, but one thing I found is to just look at your, if you're looking at them, I look every day, but at least a couple times a week, in terms of plant health, you can figure that out, right? Like if the plant's happy or not. And in general, I assume that if the plant looks happy, it's and making new growth, that usually it will rebloom that year if it's making a new growth. But there's no universal truth for all the orchids, right? That's why you have to look at the resources and kind of get to know all the peculiarities, like people are saying, but got to start somewhere, right?
I'm looking again at the chats, and someone was asking how much Dawn per gallon. It would be like maybe a drop. Whatever the wetting agent is that you're putting in, you want it, if you stir it up, if you agitate it, you want a little bit of foam to hold for a second or two. You don't want foam, big foam. So it's a kind of trial and error thing. But years ago, when I was just, doing everything in the sink, watering and repotting, it was be like a drop in a gallon. And
you see suds when it works, right? So
Yeah. Somebody was going to ask a question.
Yeah, I have a question about Maxillaria Tenufolius. So I have a couple, and last year I got like one flower from like my giant plant. So I was wondering if you have any tips. This year I have more buds, but I'm a little bit worried because I see the buds forming. I have like a few buds, but then like one of the leaves just turned yellow, and I have no idea why it did that.
Is it a big plant?
Well, I have two, and I can show you the one that has a.
Because one yellow leaf is a problem if you only have, yeah, there's more leaves on there. Leaves do get old. And generally, if it's an older pseudobulb, then those leaves are eventually going to fall. But I will tell you, I am not the person to give advice on Maxillaria Tenufolia. I stopped trying to grow it probably 30 years ago. I couldn't get them to bloom. They died. So someone else on here who grows it or grows it well, or maybe Ron, because he sees a lot of collections, can chip in and cover up my lack of knowledge.
Well, I've never grown it, so I'm not, I mean, I could say what I've seen, you know, Tom Perliti grows them well. They seem to grow in pots, but they also seem to climb slowly out of the pot. And when they do that, they don't really seem to have any available or any aerial roots. So I've seen people growing them on tall pieces of cork or long pieces of wood, but I don't really have any advice. I don't think it's a particularly difficult orchid, but I think some clones are better than others. So there's that. It looks like your plant's pretty even in the pot, growing across the top. You know, it's slowly climbing. See that? So I think there are little tiny roots underneath what are those bracts on Maxillarias are called scarious bracts. So they're really fibrous, lots of them. If you were to pull those away, you'd find them in there, but they don't seem to slough off on their own like most pseudobulbs bracts. So anyway, that was a long roundabout nothing.
most Maxillarias actually do not put out the aerial roots. All those roots go down behind the bracts down to the ground. So if you think about a growth of Coelogene cristata, you never see the roots, but they're all going back. I mean, even on a huge clump that I've seen pictures of growing on granite, they all go back. And so the fact that you don't see aerial roots, it would not be a sign that anything is wrong on it.
So I have one that I grew in pots for years and it never bloomed. I threatened it with the compost pile. I told it had one more season and I mounted it and it put out one flower. So I gave it another chance and this year it has about 20. So
none.
I don't know if it was the threat or moving it to a mount that made the difference.
Yeah. Is it fairly tight in the pot? Or is there space around, is there a lot of bark around it?
Yeah, I have actually quite a lot of bark, but yeah.
I would say if you're going to repot it, you might want to put it into a smaller pot or use bigger bark. So I'm a heavy waterer, and that was probably one of the things I probably overwatered. But if you a smaller pot and maybe something so it dries out faster would be worth it. That would be my guess if I were going to try it again, and I'm not.
So this is Tanya. I have one at show and tell. You see it later. The yellow form that I got from Hawaii. 2-inch when I got it, just like 2 growths. Someone just tore it on their big plant, gave me a piece. I brought it back. I put it in a 2-inch pot. I had 3 flowers last year. This year I potted in move it to a 4-inch pot because it gotten bigger. And you'll see it later. I think I had about 10 or 11 flowers. And I grow it in the lava rock coconut mix. It's doing extremely well. It's actually doing better than my red big Tenufolia, but I grow the yellow one brighter.
So Tanya, what temperature are you growing it at?
Well, my greenhouse gets very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. It's average 100 degrees during the day in San Jose. When the sun's out, and in the winter I heat it to mid-50s, but sometimes it stay below 55. So 52 maybe average winter nights. And I water less because I use coconut.
Okay.
Marni, I have a question about deflasking. I've been able to fairly successful in deflasking Cymbidiums, but then when it came to Sarcochilus, total fail. I don't know what I did wrong or.
What Sarcochilus were you working with? Because they're going to be quite different.
Yeah, they were mostly Scott Berry's crosses, so he had they were hybrids.
Okay, and how big were they?
Fairly
Show
small.
me your.
About that big. I mean, they weren't very big.
Put your hand up a little bit. Yeah, so maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches.
Yeah,
And what did you put them in?
I put them in precision orchiata.
Is
So
that the
the
really
seedling.
fine stuff?
It's very fine.
Yeah, so, okay. How often did they get watered?
Fairly often, because I had them in a tray and I just checked them. So it was almost every other day, especially when, I would check to see if it was dried. I also had it in a under a hood, one of those.
Oh, so plastic like a dome.
Yeah.
My guess would be that very fine bark, smaller than 1/4 inch, it probably stayed too wet. And especially with the humidity, depending on how long you left it on, that might have, it just was too humid.
Okay.
Would be my guess. Did you put them up individually? Or
Yes.
Yeah, I
Individually.
I always now just put them in a compost, and I'll take a whole flask of 25 and put it in a 4-inch cut down net pot. And with the same media that I would use for a more mature plant. I don't know if it's the competition or the extra humidity, but I used to take out the bigger plants out of a flask and put the runts in a compost. And 5 or 6 months later, the runts would be as big as the ones I had potted or mounted individually.
So this was for Sarcochilis.
That's right.
For everything. Okay.
This is for pretty much everything. There's, even if I'm going to, in 3 or 4 months, Dendrobium cinnaberinum, which is really hard to get out of flask, I'll still put it in a compost. If they're going to die, they're going to die. And then once the roots are actively growing, I will put them on a mount.
So you didn't have any problems with the roots being, when you're trying to divide them out of the compost, the roots being
yeah, I cut them.
Broken.
If I can't get them separated, I cut them. When you cut the root, it stimulates the auxin. It goes, whoa, something happened to the roots. We need to fix this, and you will get new root growth.
Oh, okay.
I mean, actually, when flasking, if the roots are a little too long and you can't do it, you just cut them off and stick them in. Cut them off. The roots are, well, we'll cut them off so they're like 1/4 inch or so. So they'll just go into the media. But you don't. Most of those, if you pull it apart carefully and you've got these really long roots, most of them are going to die anyway once you pot them up. So, and because when I'm deflasking quite a bit. I just want to get it done. And potting them up individually, it works for some people. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time too and
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, some of them are going to die anyway. They could die in the compost and I don't have to deal with them.
Okay.
But I think it was probably too wet, because if you grow this, normally you would grow the Sarcochilis and they'd be drying out pretty quickly. And in that fine bark, down the bottom, it's not going to be drying out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Marni, do you still use the anti-transferrin on your plants when they come out of flask?
Yes, I do. I use Vapor Guard, which is VAPORGARD, and it's it's a synthetic, but it's not a wax. It doesn't wash off, the next time you water. And I spray that on plants that are just imported. Some of they're a little tender when I'm repotting or remounting, and I spray it on them. Things that I take out of flask. It gives them at least a month before they start transpiring normally, so that the roots have a chance to get settled in and they can take hold. Makes a huge difference. If you take out Lycastes, they turn brown in a day or two. If you put the Vapor Guard on it, they're still looking pretty good in weeks.
Do you recommend keeping the Vapor Guard off of the roots, or
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you don't spray it on the roots.
No, you want the roots to be able to take up water. So I'll either dip it in or I use a spray. It only comes in a gallon as far as I know, but a couple of people could split it up together. It doesn't go bad, and it makes a huge difference. I also, when I'm deflasking, I spray them with some kind of beneficial microbes. There's 1,000 on the market. And I'll also put in a fungicide to give them a good start.
All right.
Okay.
So it's just time check. This has been great, Marni. Thank you. See, it was easy, right? It could keep going. So I'm gonna just keep an eye on the time. It's 8:15, 8:20. So wanted to kind of, any final questions before we transition over to Lynn for show and tell? And you can obviously keep the chat going, and I put some answers to ones I could in there. So if you want advice that people asked, Marni, I don't know if you want to say a word about Orchids Forum or other places that are good to ask questions.
Sure. I'm active on the Orchids Forum. It's a very friendly, nobody's hostile there, welcoming to beginners. It's an online forum, and people post pictures. I also am active on Facebook. There's a number of Facebook groups for orchids. There's a specialty group for almost everything. But Orchid Species Journal is one that I like. I post not so much these days on my own because I'm short of time, but there's a Facebook page for orchid sowing. There's sales groups. There's a Cattleya group. There's a miniature group. There's a underlights group or windowsill group. It's like anything on the internet. You're going to get some answers that are really good, and you're going to get some that are just kind of off the wall. So you kind of have to learn whose answers to believe and see if you can figure out who's who. But I constantly ask questions there and answer questions just because it's a really valuable resource. You got people from all around the world at all levels, from high-tech commercial growers to people who've been at it 40 years to people who've been at it 2 weeks. So there's a lot on the internet. And again, some of it's good and some of it's not. You kind of have to wade through it.
All right. Well, thank you.
I think that was really good. I think, that was just great.
Thank you, Marni.
Thank you. That was better than I had hoped. So I'm glad we got people to ask questions. Some societies don't. So this was really good, and I hope you got your questions answered.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Marni.
Okay. Take care. Thank you very much. I'm going to back out of here and go back to work. Take care.
Thank you. One other question. I'm going to just so if some people were asking about sites to look at Lineage. There's several. I like this bluenanta.com or Orchids Roots. It's good for
They're good.
hybrids.
Yeah.
Shows you parentage and stuff's pretty easy to use. So
they have a Facebook page also. So
anyway, tons of questions. Keep it up. That's why we're here. And all right. And let me let's see here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Marni, thank you.
Bye, Marni. Thanks.
Thank you, Marni.
Thank you.
All right. So now Lynn, actually, why am I sharing? Let me get off. It's Lynn's turn.
Okay, Bill, do I click on share screen first or slideshow first?
Open your slideshow and then click on share screen and then select the slideshow, the open slideshow.
I love seeing everybody's flowers, but I can't wait to get off of Zoom because we're still learning, even after a year, how to do this.
I know.
It's not just you, it's a lot of people who think we've got it and then we don't.
I'm lucky I had 10 years of this before the pandemic, so.
You make it sound so simple and so easy, and then we try to do it and crap happens.
By the way, Lynn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I can't get the little screen share at the bottom. I think I need to start over here. I'm going to share screen first.
Okay.
Screen.
Last time you got it perfect, whatever you did.
No, well, if I write it down, I would remember, right?
And sometimes it's in a different place. I don't know. Sometimes those things move. They're on the side instead of the bottom. So it depends on your laptop or computer or whatever.
The Napa Society gets to meet in person in July.
Wow.
The senior center where we meet is opening in July. So we're going to have our barbecue in August.
In June. Oh, so far.
Yay, there you go.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Tom Pickford.
Well, we see your slides and your notes, so we don't.
You don't want to see those.
Yeah, we're not seeing just the slideshow.
Now, do you see just the slides?
Well, kinda. We're seeing your slides and your notes. So we see the big SFOS show and tell, and we see the next slide's going to be.
I've got two screens here. Let's see.
Yeah, we're seeing the preview.
At the top of the screen where you see display settings, there should be an option that says switch presenter view. There you go, swap presenter view and slideshow.
Look at that. Now what do you see?
That's it. You got it. Something's happening.
Something.
Gotta get rid of the black.
Yeah, it's all black.
Oh.
What did you say is happening in June, Bill?
Peninsula Orchid Society is having its first get together in person.
At the garden.
Oh yeah,
center.
down. Okay.
Meeting, yes.
Just do that one. That's good.
Okay.
That's good. We can still see the big stuff. So.
Okay, so we have another great show and tell tonight. We have 50 orchids, so fewer than usual from 18 contributors. And as usual, the order that I do them in is the order that I receive them in. And Tom Pickford was the early bird this month. This is his Cattleya Seagull's yellow bug, which is a primary hybrid of two lovely species. This is you can see in the bottom right, Cattleya brigeri by Brassivola nodosa. Seagull's Landing Orchids was a very active hybridizer in the 70s and 80s in upstate New York, and they registered this cross in 1985. The flowers are starry shaped with long tubular lip and frilly margins, just like the brigeri parent. This is Tom's Oncidium navium, formerly Odontoglossum navium. So there were about 300 species of odontoglossums from South America before the taxonomists in 2009 decided that odonts were too genetically similar to Oncidium. So they eliminated the genus Odontoglossum and they reclassified most of them as Oncidium. Some of them went Gomez and a few other places. So Navia is found in the Andes Mountains in Colombia and Venezuela up to about 6,500 feet. So that tells us they prefer cool nights. So this is a perfect outdoor grower in the Bay Area. Tom grows his in his cool greenhouse in Bolinas, which nighttime temperatures get down into the 40s. Even now they're getting down into the 50s. So odonts or oncidiums are good windowsill candidates if you have bright or filtered light. This is Tom's Dendrobium Trichostomium.
Oh.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Gorgeous.
The species widespread in Southeast Asia from about 1,300 to 5,300 feet. So that tells us it can thrive in a variety of temperature ranges with bright and direct light. You can see it, Tom has it up high in his greenhouse. The flowers are fragrant. They're about 2 inches and they can last 3 weeks. The inflorescences are pendant, so they put on a beautiful show. This is a great flowering of a beautifully grown plant, Tom. And Tom also shows us Dendrobium Unicum, a primary hybrid made by Vachereau Lecouf in France. And just a little aside, I've been able to visit Vachereau Lecouf, their greenhouse is outside Paris, and they claim to be the longest continuously operating orchid growers because the French government designated them as a national treasure. And so during World War II, they were given enough gasoline to survive the cold winters. Vachereau Lecouf is especially known for Phalaenopsis hybridizing, and they're credited with developing the micropropagation process that we know as mericloning. But enough about that. Tom's flowers, these are a little over 2 inches. They're Spectacularly beautiful, Tom, and they merit our applause. Bill Martin shows us this unusual Pathopedulum Foliai Alba. It's unusual because they typically look like the little photo on the left with the synsepal, which synsepal is the fusion of the two dorsal sepals, and it's usually hidden behind the big pouch. On Dale's, you can see that they've split and they've actually flared out. He doesn't know if that's common with this species or if this is an unusual sibling population, but it's very interesting. Foliai is a species native to the Philippines, where it's found in dappled or filtered light, typically at low elevations. So that means that paths are probably good windowsill growers. They like probably the same temperatures you like in your home. And I love the little hairs on the edges of the margins of the petals. This is Dale Spicerianum, a species found in India, Burma, China, often on limestone rocks, with their roots buried deep in the humus anchored to the limestone, like Marni was talking about. And they're shaded by ferns and ginger. So even though they're out on rocks, they are in the shade. Here we can see the synsepal peeking out behind either side of the pouch. This is named after a British official in India in the 1800s. Dale loves his multifloral paths. This is QF Kamakani. This is an unawarded hybrid, which was just registered by Quintal Farms last year. The parentage is about 2/3 Sandrianum, with some Rothschildianum and Pathopedulum rounding it out. The Sandrianum is where it gets those spectacular long ribbon-like petals. This is beautifully grown, as you can see. It's nicely displayed in a pot by Marni Turkel. And this is Jan Anderson's Encyclia Prismaticarpa. The taxonomists have moved it, of course, to Prosthecia Prismaticarpa, but never mind that. Jan grows this hanging in her lath house in Orange County, where it gets strong shaded light. She says there are 5 spikes, and this is her favorite Encyclia. It's a species native to Panama, Costa Rica, up to about 4,500 feet. So it can take nighttime temperatures down into the low 50s. And I think that the contrast of those creamy sepals and petals with the chocolate spots and the pale rose or magenta colored lip is really, really striking. The flowers are waxy and long lasting, and they are fragrant. This is Jan's Lycastine Aromatica. She grows it low in the greenhouse where it's lightly shady most of the day and is quite humid. This is a delightful little species from Mexico down into Central America, and it is deciduous. So watering should be sharply reduced or eliminated completely after the leaves drop, maybe an occasional light misting if the humidity is not very high. No water until the new growth starts in the spring. And the new growths are susceptible to rot, so it's important not to let water collect in those fresh new tips. You can see the new growth right behind the uppermost flower. The flowers and new growth started about the same time in the spring, and the flowers are deliciously fragrant. I think, to me, they smell kind of cinnamon lemony, but other people describe them otherwise. And this is Jan Anderson's new greenhouse. Construction is underway. Jan moved to Novato from Orange County last year, and now it's time for the greenhouse. The foundation and the knee wall were poured last week, and she hopes to be able to move her orchids up from Orange County in late June. So congratulations, Jan. It's exciting. Judy Carney shows us Dendrobium anosmum album. The typical color form is light rose to raspberry in color, as you can see on the right. So this pure white form is unusual and it's very striking. Anosmum is found from the Philippines to Papua New Guinea at low elevations. So that tells us it prefers intermediate temps, but it probably is also adaptable to a wider range. You can see that it flowers on mature leafless canes. So don't panic about those leafless canes. The flowers are 3 to 4 inches. They're fragrant. They can last 3 weeks in cool temperatures. And I read that this albino form is thought to be endemic to the Philippines, only found in the Philippines. This is Judy's Trichophilia Hennesiana, excuse me. Trichophilia is a genus of about 40 species from Central and South America. Hennesiana is found in Colombia and Ecuador. At a wide range of elevations up to about 7,000 feet. So it can grow cool to intermediate. It's wonderfully fragrant 5-inch flowers with a ruffled lip. And there's a crystalline texture. If you had it in the sunlight, you would see it kind of look like diamond dust. They display themselves really beautifully on the inflorescence peeking out at us. The inflorescences rise from the base of the pseudobulbs. This is a really rewarding plant for anybody that can find one. Another white beauty from Judy, this is Agricum Leonis, the Madagascar form. According to the Baker notes, Marni talked about Baker, the Baker books, there are 2 forms of this species found in very different areas. The smaller form is found at the northern tip of Madagascar, growing near sea level. That's what we see here. The second larger form is found in the Comoro Islands, growing at about 3,000 feet. Both of them are intermediate to warm growers, and they require much less water for about 6 months. They're happiest mounted, as you can see, Judy has them here. These 4 pristine flowers are about 1.5 to 2 inches. They're fragrant, they're long lasting, and they're beautifully presented looking out at us with long spurs or nectaries to attract the pollinator, which is probably a night moth. Renata Johnson shows us her gorgeous Laelia purpurata variety Werkhauseri. So purpurata season is just starting, and we can see why purpuratas are called the queen of the Laelias. They're just majestic plants. They're native to Brazil, where they're really revered, and they're also competitively collected. There are entire shows devoted only to purpuratas in Brazil. So picture our huge POE with the entire hall filled with Laelia purpuratas. There are more named color forms and varieties of purpurata in the hundreds than any other orchids, and color is the principal criteria for naming a particular form or variety. So the name Werkhauseri, named after a Brazilian collector, Werkhauseri is generally used to encompass a number of blue forms. Laelia purpurata plants can be over 3 feet tall. They're found primarily in the coastal areas of Brazil in tall trees, where they're out of reach of collectors. Purpuratas tolerate a wide variety of temperatures. I find that they bloom better in my cool greenhouse down into the low 40s in the winter than they do in the intermediate house. So many Bay Area collectors do grow them outdoors successfully. I hope we'll see some more purpuratas. Susan Anderson shows us her Dendrobium Trichostomium. This is a small to medium-sized warm-growing epiphyte from New Guinea. The name means wreath of hair dendrobium. And if you look at the little inset on the right, the wreath of hair refers to the lip, which is surrounded by fringy hairs. They look like, those little hairs look like they probably trap the pollinator and force them to crash into the anther cap and then carry it forth. Susan got this unusual plant from Cindy Hill, and it blooms off and on throughout the spring and summer. The flowers are long lasting. And you can see the flowers are both resupinate and non-resupinate. That means that some of them have the lip on the bottom, lip down, and others are lip up. Susan, this is a great close-up of this plant. This is Susan's Cattleya tigrina, also known as Cattleya leopoldii. This is not a windowsill orchid. It plants up to about 4 feet tall. It's a species from Brazil, and it typically grows in the top of trees, as you can see on the right, dense swampy forest areas. So this indicates that it likes bright filtered light, good humidity, and strong air movement, that it would get up in those treetops. Susan's is growing in a pot on her bench in her intermediate greenhouse, reaching up toward the ceiling. This is the earliest I've seen her plant bloom. It's about a month early, but what a beautiful head of tightly arranged flowers, the bronze spotted sepals and petals, and that fabulous magenta lip. And it's very fragrant. Let's hear the applause for this one. And Susan's Vanda white crane is a primary hybrid of Neophonetia falcata and Vanda sanderiana, which are shown here on the left. To me, it looks like a larger form of falcata with fuller, rounder sepals and petals than the falcata has. Very striking. The flowers are almost 2 inches. It's a reliable bloomer for Susan. She says The inflorescences do not all open at once, so it puts on a show over a pretty good period of time. And this is the most inflorescences she's had on it. As you can see, she hangs it quite high in the greenhouse for bright light. And oh, wait till you see all the beautiful orchids Susan is offering in the SFOS sale. Little plug. Carolyn Fisher. So Cymbidium season is winding down, but with warmer days, but Carolyn still has this lovely Cymbidium hybrid growing outdoors in her home in Marin. And here's her story, I'm quoting her. This Cymbidium is at least 10 years old, given to my son in a very large broken pot by his 80-plus-year-old neighbors. After seeing it languish in his yard, largely unattended for at least a year, I asked when he intended to do something to take care of it. He had no plans and offered it to me, promptly loading it in the back of my car, where it stayed a week before I went to Sonoma County Orchid Society's repotting event. I used a dolly. Dolly's not an approved word anymore. You have to call them hand carts, by the way. Not politically correct. I used a hand cart to unload it to the work area with help from my friends, who also helped wrestle the plant from the pot. Judy Carney took a look at it and suggested I get a saw and remove about a foot of roots. That took the rest of the afternoon, so we wrapped it in wet newspaper, and I now have to do, and I headed back home, not sure what to do next. I located a plastic tub, slid it out of the trunk, and then slid the tub across the yard, where it has remained for 3 or 4 years in water. Last year and this year, it's produced 11 beautiful spikes. Alas, the plastic container recently began to crack. So Carolyn is looking for suggestions on what to do next. I think she's got to get it out of the water and bite the bullet and probably divide it and pot it, probably get that saw out again. Or I often use a small hatchet. But any suggestions, please chat, Carolyn. Chani Langland has a white theme going tonight. This is her Mysticidium Bonai, a small species found in the northern part of South Africa. It should be grown mounted or in a basket, as Chani shows it here, mounted. It will not do well potted. I know that from experience. It prefers intermediate to cool temperatures. It likes bright shade, lots of water while it's growing, much less water in the winter. While it blooms just once a year, this display is worth the wait. This is a lot of flowers for a small plant, and it's fragrant, so very nice job. Very elegant, Chani. This is Chani's Mysticidium Neil McCormick. This is a primary hybrid of Mysticidium Bonai, which we just saw, crossed with Mysticidium capense. Capense is found more widely throughout most of South Africa, and it has a longer white nectar, as you can see here. It prefers somewhat warmer temps than the Bonai and year-round water, and capense blooms more freely than Bonai, and I'm guessing this hybrid probably does as well for Chani. There are 10 miniature Vandaceous species in the genus Mysticidium, and Neil McCormick is the only registered hybrid. I was surprised to find that. The flowers are really pristine and lovely. And Chani's Arangus Valley Isle. Arangus is a larger genus spread throughout Africa, Madagascar, Comoros Islands, and there are quite a few beautiful hybrids. Chani's Valley Isle is a cross of Arangus somalensis and Arangus mysticidii, which you see on the right. The Arangus somalensis is found along the east coast of Africa, including, not too surprisingly, in Somalia. And Arangus mysticidii, which means the Mysticidium-like Arangus, is also found on the east coast of Africa, though its range is not quite as far north as somalensis. Culture of these two Arangus is similar to that of Mysticidiums. Both parents seem to have that slightly orange nectary and noticeably orange ovary. We see that on the Valley Isle. This is an unawarded hybrid, and if it's still fresh, we'd love to see that on the judging table, Chani. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip.
Oh, pretty.
From our newly elected Vice President, Corey Majewski, this is her Brassavola chickadee. This is Brassavola venosa crossed with Laelia lundii. Laelia lundii is one of the smallest Laelias. The plant's only about 5 inches tall, and here it is crossed with Brassavola venosa, which is less than a foot tall. The resulting hybrid, Brassavola chickadee, is a great little window-sized orchid. Peter Lynn of Diamond Orchids just registered this little hybrid last year, and Corey received it from Peter after his talk at SFOS. Good job getting 2 blooms on this first bloom seedling, Corey. The hybrid is still unawarded, and with its shape, symmetry, and interesting lip patterns, it would be great to see this in person on the judging table. Corey says it's beautifully fragrant at night. And from our president, Jeff Harris, this is Dracula Navarro Aurum. At least I think that's how it's pronounced, since it's a species named for an Ecuadorian orchidist named Navarro. These charming little monkey faces are about 2 inches wide by about 4 inches long. The Draculas are cool growing genus from the Andes, so they prefer cool, humid conditions, and they need to be kept moist in low light. I'm sure Jeff grows this in his fog house under his deck. And if you can provide good water and the conditions they prefer, Draculas are just a delight to have in your collection. And Jeff's Dracula Posidarum. This one is a species from Colombia, where they're found in cloud forests at about 8,000 feet. As you can see, they're hard to photograph because the flowers tend to grow face down, but the close-up on the right shows the wonderfully fringed margins, and they can bloom off and on during the year, according to Jeff. We expect some beautiful Draculas for sale by John Leathers in the upcoming SFOS sale, so be sure to check those out and give them cool, moist, low light conditions year round. This is Jeff's Oncidium Pacific Sunrise, a hybrid of 3 small flowered Oncidiums from Central and South America. These are great windowsill growers that reward you with lots of flowers, pretty long lasting, and they are also generally fragrant. Deborah Val's Qualters shows us the Cymbidium Dorothy stockstill. This is a great old-timey hybrid, and the clone Forbidden Fruit is the most awarded of all of the stock sills. It's been awarded in Peru, Australia, Puerto Rico, and of course in the US. Deborah says the flowers are about 1.5 inches, and the deep burgundy velvety lip is really beautiful. This is another of Deborah's Cymbidiums, a lovely large hybrid with butter, lemon, sepals, and petals, contrasting with the burgundy spots along the edge of the lip. Another of Deborah's Cymbidium hybrids, a pure white form in a lovely cluster of flowers. Deborah grows her Sims outdoors in San Francisco, and the recent cool weather has nicely prolonged the blooming season for her this year. And this is Deborah's Dendrobium Quiniano. We've talked about those before. They're a wonderful Australian orchid, which also loves our Bay Area outdoor temperatures. If you look closely at the lip, you can see your sweet little pink spots and dots on it. It's very cute, Deborah. Jonathan Fong, this is his first meeting and his first show and tell. So welcome, Jonathan. This is his Neo-Phoenicia, or now it's Vanda Belcata. The photo on the left is, he said, a couple days after the lovely little flowers had opened. And the photo on the right is a couple days after Jonathan attempted to pollinate it. Stay tuned, he'll let us know if the pollination was successful. Because the flowers are yellow and Felcatas don't have a yellow form, I'm wondering if this might be a hybrid. I don't see a name tag in it. Jonathan got this Dendrobium Unicum a few months ago, and it immediately sent out spikes. Unicum means unique, and the color and tangerine or apricot scent are certainly unique. And this one is non-resuppinate. If you look closely at the one that's kind of hanging out by itself, you'll see that the lip is upper. It's above the rest of the flower. And it's a really interesting markings on the lip. This is a species from Thailand and Vietnam, where it grows with a very cool, dry winter. I may have gotten the dry part a little over enthusiastic because mine is permanently deciduous, as you can see on the right, i.e. dead. Jonathan has his in Jonathan has his in a paludarium for the wet season. I had to look up paludarium, which is a terrarium for reptiles. And here is his paludarium, which he assures me contains no reptiles, just a few freshwater shrimp and some aquatic snails. He says it's about 6 months old, and he says, quote, I built a low-tech setup to keep cool intermediate growing miniatures and now some small wet season dendrobiums. So the majority of the orchids in it are Lepanthes, Stellus, Bulbophyllum, and a couple of Masdevallias. I'm liking the set and forget type of care it has, so I don't have to water them all constantly if they were in a greenhouse or other orchidarium. I use felt to wick the water up to the orchids that prefer slightly damp roots, as well as a small water pump that moves water to run over some of the rocks and increase the humidity in the tank, which is about 90 to 93%. 6 months later, all but one of the orchids, one of the bulbophyllums, has flowered, but Jonathan thinks he's found a spike on that one, so he's hoping it'll flower soon. So this is, I haven't seen this before, where they're growing in a tank with water above the water. So if there are members that would like more information about this Paleodaria, maybe we can ask Jonathan to do a 10-minute skill session on a future Zoom meeting. It's really pretty. This is Dave Hermeyer's Sarcochilus fitzgeraldii. Sarcochilus is a genus of about 25 species from Northern Australia, and Fitzgeraldii is one of just 2 or 3 that have been very successfully and widely commercialized. This is a perfect windowsill plant. They're pretty easy to find if you're looking for one. And if you love to water your plants, this one's for you. They like cool temperatures. They do very well outdoors, protected in the Bay Area. And the arching inflorescences bear a number of long-lasting fragrant flowers. Flowers are about 1 inch with little pink dots in the interior around that saccate lip. The lip is kind of a little sac, not quite a pouch. This is Dave's Dendrobium Loaded Gzi. It can be grown in a pot, but it's perfect for mounting, as Dave has it here, because they branch freely, as you can see, with new roots forming on each branch as it develops. This is a species from Southeast Asia, grows up to about 5,000 feet of elevation. It thrives with cool temperatures down into the 40s, with much less water in the winter. The leaves are deciduous, and the inflorescences arrive at the leaf nodes on both leafless and leafy canes. The flowers are about 2 inches, which is large for this plant size. And in the blow up on the left, you can see the lovely fringed lip and the deep golden interior of the lip. And this is Dave's Vandus cerulescens. Cerulescens means bluish. This is a beautifully grown plant with 5 or 6 spikes. Applause for Dave. It's an intermediate to warm grower from Southeast Asia, where it gets cool, dry winter rest. So not as dry, not so dry as to desiccate the flowers. It likes very bright light, good humidity, which is why Dave has the Spanish moss around its roots to hold moisture. The flowers are about 1.5 inches, and they are fragrant. Stuart Menaker shows us this very complex Phalaenopsis hybrid. I'm not going to read the whole name, but it's the pie chart there shows the parentage of just one of the parents of this flower on the right. The results are beautiful rose and magenta flowers, very peachy blush that draws the eye and probably also draws the pollinator to the lip. This is Stuart's Bulbophyllum falcatum standing tall, a wonderfully weird bulbo from tropical West Africa. Bulbophyllum is the largest and most diverse genus of orchids with over 1,500 species found in all tropical areas on Earth, but they all have one thing in common, a hinged lip, which moves with the slightest breeze to get the attention of the pollinator. And when the pollinator lands and reaches down behind the lip for the reward, the lip flips it up, makes him touch the anther cap, and so the process of pollination. This is a small epiphyte about 4 inches tall, so it's a good windowsill candidate. It spreads horizontally via rhizomes. Susan Anderson won a Best in Show in Sonoma a couple of years ago with her standing tall clone. So this is indeed an impressive plant when it matures. Kate Klum shows us 2 African species first. This is Microcelia stoltzii, one of Kay's favorites. And this year it has over 500 spice-scented flowers. Let's hit the applause button for Kay. As you can see, this is a leafless orchid. Might not have noticed, those are all roots, those are not leaves. So it's best mounted on smooth wood because the roots photosynthesize. And on smooth wood, the photosynthetic roots can receive sun. If they don't, it will starve to death. They need regular year-round watering and fertilizer. They need bright sun, humid surroundings to bloom and be happy. The flowers are only about 1/4 of an inch. And Kay says they're heather scented. She bought this beautiful Stoltzii from Cal Orchids in Santa Barbara. This is Kay's Certochilus chayuana, which is blooming for the first time for her. It's also fragrant with a scent more like gardenia. This is a 3-inch ruler hanging from the bottom of it. So you can see the nectary is about twice as long as the 3-inch wide flower. This is an epiphytic species from Central to West Africa. It's found in tropical forests at elevations of 3,000 to 4,000 feet, where it benefits from a cooler, drier winter. So this grows in an intermediate greenhouse for Kay. Now 2 Mexican species from Kay. We talked about Proseccia citrina. This is another favorite. If it weren't so beautiful, it might be prized just for its fragrance. It is gorgeous. This one is grown, as Kay said, talking to Marni, this one is grown outside, right next to 2 more that don't bloom for Kay, and I have the same experience. And if anyone knows why, I think everybody suggested move it around, try something different. But if you have some more ideas, please use chat to respond to Kay. This gorgeous thing should be having an identity crisis because it's been changed from Epidendrum citrinum to Encyclia citrina to Proseccia citrina and also Euchyle citrina. I'm not sure which of those names is current, so don't change your name tags. It grows in a pendant manner hanging down, upside down from the bottom of branches of the host tree. The flowers are waxy, and as you can see, they don't open fully. They have the most rewarding heavenly lemon scent. Kay's second Mexican species is Trichophilia Tortillas. We saw Hennessiana earlier from Judy. Tortillas is also found as far south as Panama in wet cloud forests up to about 5,000 feet. Kay says it doesn't seem to have any fragrance. And it's grown in an intermediate greenhouse. So as you can see, the flower spikes are somewhat pendant and they start from the base of the pseudobulb. So it's a good idea to plant Trichophilias high in the pot so the basal flower spikes don't get trapped inside and they can come over the edge for the display. Paul and Edith Bourbon show us Disa veitchii. This is a primary hybrid of 2 South American species, Disa uniflora by Disa racemosa. You can see it's almost as tall as Edith. Paul said this is one of his favorite Disas. It's easy to grow and very reliable, unlike the famously fussy uniflora parent. He grows it in his cool greenhouse only because he says if I leave it outside, the creatures will dig them out of their pots and smear them all around the patio in search of bugs. This year, the spikes are super tall and all of his Disas seem to be blooming a bit late this year. Paul also grows carnivorous plants as well as orchids, and he grows the Disas just like he grows most of his carnivorous plants. The flowers of veitchii are 3 to 4 inches, just the loveliest shade of rose pink. This is my Dendrobium Dixanthum, which I purchased 3 years ago from our recent speaker, Wenqing Perner. It blooms on leafless, deciduated canes. And you can see there's 2 new growths just emerging at the base down in the roots. This plant looks dead for about 5 months of the year and wants no water during that time. I just give it an early morning misting if the temperatures in the greenhouse are warm. It's a species found in Burma and Thailand in deciduous forests in the very tops of the trees, which means that it gets the brightest light in winter when the host trees are leafless. It also likes strong air movement, and I grow it in my cool greenhouse with bright indirect light. I've had this Brassavola digbyana for 5 or 6 years, and it just gave me the biggest flower ever. It was 18 centimeters or a little over 7 inches, and the fragrance just filled the greenhouse. Many of us enjoy digbyanas in our collections, and we're dazzled every year by the deeply and intricately cut lip margins. This is fringe gone rogue. This and Brassavola glauca were recently moved to Rhincolalia because their pseudobulb, leaf, and flower structures are not like other Brassavolas. Digbyana is found from Mexico into Central America at very low elevation, so it does best grown warm with bright filtered light and strong air movement. And my Bulbophyllum fascinator variety semi-alba. The flower is about 7 inches long, including the tails, which are actually the two dorsal sepals fused together about halfway down. The photo on the right looks to me like a screaming clown, and the foot of the column is hinged, so it bobs and jiggles with the slightest breeze, looking like the clown is actually wagging his tongue. I think it would take a brave pollinator to approach this flower. It's found in Malaysia, Borneo, and the Philippines near sea level, so it's a warm grower. It likes some shade and good air movement. Tanya's Pathopedulum Magic Lantern, Tanya Lamb, HCC AOS. Tanya just received the high class certificate, or HCC, from the American Orchid Society judging this month at Foliai. And when a previously unawarded clone is given an award, the owner gets to give it a clonal name. So congratulations, Tanya. This flower has beautiful form. It's fully symmetrical, and the colors are very crisp and clear. This is a hybrid that was made by Dave Sorokowski, and he just registered in 2019. Both species in the background, Limianum and Primulinum, are from Sumatra. Both are warm growers, but the only previous award on Magic Lantern was last year on Tom Pickford's plant, which he grows in his cool greenhouse, which gets down in the low 40s. So this must be a pretty adaptable little charmer. This is Tanya's Brassia Edvalu Goldilocks. This is a cross made over 50 years ago of Brassia Druidiana and Arquigera from Panama and Costa Rica, respectively. Tom Perlini and Japheth Coe have both had it awarded over the years. It prefers intermediate temps, but it's probably adaptable to cooler temperatures. By the way, you'll see one for sale when the SFOS sale opens next week. And Tanya has lots of beautiful orchids for sale, so be sure to check them out. This is Tanya's Sarcochilus hartmanii, an Australian cool growing species. Early we saw Dave Hermeyer's Sarco Fitzgeraldii, which you see on the lower left, had the little red dots in the center. Tanya's hartmanii is the other Sarco species, which has been successfully and widely commercialized. And both of them have been very extensively used in Sarcochilus hybridizing. This is a perfect windowsill plant, should be easy to find. This time of year they're blooming. And if you love to water your plants, this one's for you. They like cool temperatures and they do very well outdoors, protected in the Bay Area. And Tanya's Vanda Christensoniana hits the applause meter, I think. This was previously Ascocentrum Christensonianum. And a point of trivia, the ending of the genus name, the first word, and the ending of the species name, the second word, have to match. So Ascocentrum Christensonianum became Vanda Christensoniana. Does that make sense? Either way, this is named for our late local friend, Eric Christensen, I believe in 2012. It's from Vietnam, where it's found near sea level in dry, dusty lowland forests. So that tells us it does not need as much water as most Vandas, but it likes bright light. And this is just beautifully grown, Tanya. Okay, here we go, the pet parade. Gigi, Carolyn shows us her gorgeous, and she knows it, kitty, Gigi. Gigi is keeping watch over Carolyn's outdoor orchid collection. She's a ragdoll, which is a cross of Persian and Siamese. And I understand Gigi is something of a princess, because a year or so ago, Carolyn told me she had a couple of mice in the kitchen and Gigi wanted none of it. She stayed in the bedroom.
I didn't know you remembered.
I remembered. This is Susan's Cody, golden retriever, relaxing on the couch with his squeaky flower toy, which I'm sure he thinks is a Dendrobium chrysotoxum. Cody is a 2-year-old golden retriever. He weighs in at a fully muscled 95 pounds. He's a rock, and he's the love of Rich and Susan's life. And here's what's happening in my backyard. Male house finch by female house finch stole most of my Spanish moss and built the little nest on the right. May 1st, 5 little eggs showed up, then go down, lower right. On Mother's Day, May 9th, those 5 little eggs turned into 5 little fluffs. And a week later, those 5 little fluffs turned into 5 hungry mouths. And then a week later, they were gone, May 23rd, leaving behind a poop-encrusted nest. They were very cute. So that's it for tonight. Thank you very much. Stay
Thank
well.
you.
Happy growing.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Lynn.
Lynn.
Lynn. Great.
Wonderful.
I've
Another
got a
great
I've got a
presentation.
master. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Oh, wow.
That was great, Lynn. Thank you. So, great. So before we do the raffle, I want to just put this up again because I noticed some people joined and there was some back and forth over the of attendance over the course of the meeting. So these announcements and things are, you should be getting your newsletters. I'm just saying there's a lot of new members. So just kind of saying a few of these things. We update things on our website. So if you have any questions, definitely reach out to us and welcome everyone. So without further ado, let's see. So I have the raffle name. So first of all, the $35 Farm Fresh to You coupon goes to Deborah Vales Qualters. So, yes, congratulations, Deborah. Then we have 10 $20 gift certificates for Tiny Jungle and Daly City, can be used online. And the winners are Eric Rice, John Fong, Cameron, Lila, Michelle Mai, Nancy Hills, Paul Carey, Roma, Eugen, and Gary Bark. So congratulations. A lot of new members made it onto the list. So congrats.
That's
and
great.
glad to see everyone here. And we'll see you. Pay attention to the emails and notices coming out about the member plant sale. It's a good opportunity. And let me know if you want to help out on Sunday, June 27th at Shell Dance, because we can use some volunteer help. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody. Great job.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Really great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.